Hey everyone, I'm Elliot Voss. People think marriages end because of one terrible mistake. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they fall apart so slowly that you don't realize what's happening until it's already too late. This is the story of how one parking receipt led me to uncover a second life my wife had been building, without me ever noticing. Let's get into it. My name is Ryan Holloway. I'm 39 years old and I've worked as an aircraft mechanic in Boise, Idaho for the past 16 years. People assume my job is about fixing airplanes. It isn't. Most of my day is spent looking for problems that most people would never notice. A loose fitting, a hairline crack, a vibration that's just a little different than yesterday. Aircraft rarely fail because of one catastrophic mistake. Most accidents begin with tiny problems that nobody thinks matter. I never imagined the same thing could happen in a marriage. Claire and I met almost 12 years ago at a friend's backyard barbecue. Neither of us wanted to be there. I just finished a long Saturday shift at the airport and she was covering for a coworker who canceled at the last minute. We both reached for the last can of root beer in the cooler. She smiled and pulled her hand back. "You got there first. I'll split it with you." She laughed. "I think there are more inside." That was the beginning. Our first date lasted almost 4 hours. Not because we planned it, because conversation came naturally. She worked in logistics for a regional freight company. I worked on airplanes. Neither of us had glamorous careers, but we shared the same goal. We wanted stability, a small house, reliable cars, enough savings that a broken water heater wouldn't become a financial emergency. 3 years later, we were married. Nothing fancy. Close friends, family. A barbecue afterward instead of an expensive reception. It fit us perfectly. The following spring, we bought our first house. It wasn't much to look at. Old carpet, outdated cabinets, a backyard that looked like weeds had won the war years earlier. We spent almost every weekend fixing something, painting bedrooms, replacing light fixtures, watching online tutorials before realizing the people in those videos made everything look much easier than it actually was. One Saturday, we spent 6 hours installing laminate flooring in the hallway. When we finished, one seam refused to line up. Claire stared at it. "We should redo it." I shook my head. "No. It'll bother me." "Good." She frowned. "Why?" "Because every time you see it, you'll remember we built this place together." She rolled her eyes. "That might be the corniest thing you've ever said." "I've got plenty worse." She laughed and kissed me anyway. For years, life was simple. Not exciting, just comfortable. She usually left for work before I did. I'd come home smelling like jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. Some nights we'd order pizza. Other nights we'd eat leftover tacos while watching whatever show we happened to be following. Looking back now, those ordinary evenings are the things I miss the most. Everything started changing after Claire's company was purchased by a national logistics corporation called Northline Distribution. Most employees expected layoffs. Instead, Claire was promoted. Director of Regional Operations. She earned every bit of it. She'd always been the smartest person in the room, even if she never admitted it. The promotion came with a raise. It also came with constant travel. Seattle, Denver, Salt Lake City, Portland. At first, I was thrilled for her. We celebrated with dinner downtown. She confessed she was nervous. What if they realized they promoted the wrong person? I laughed. Then don't give them a chance. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say something inspiring. I fix airplanes. That's about as inspiring as I get. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I couldn't do this without you. I believed her. For the first few months, everything made sense. Longer hours, late-night conference calls, weekend flights. A bigger job demanded bigger sacrifices. I never questioned it. Then one name started appearing in almost every conversation. Marcus Vale. Marcus wants me in Seattle next week. Marcus thinks Boise should lead the rollout. Marcus says corporate's impressed. At first, he was just another coworker, nothing more. The real change wasn't Marcus, it was Claire. She used to come home with stories, funny customers, warehouse disasters, coworkers who accidentally shipped the wrong pallet halfway across the country. Those stories disappeared. How was your trip? Busy. Anything interesting happen? Not really. Those two words became her favorite answer. Then I noticed her phone. It used to be everywhere. Kitchen counter, coffee table, bathroom sink. Once I even found it in the refrigerator after she'd been unloading groceries while talking to her sister. Now it never left her hand. If it buzzed during dinner, she'd glance at the screen and quietly say, "Work." Every single time. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. Stress changes people. Promotions change routines. Eventually, things would settle down. Then she came home from a 4-day trip looking happier than she'd seemed in months. She hugged me the second she walked through the door, ordered Thai food, opened a bottle of wine. That night, we laughed more than we had in weeks. For a few hours, it felt like I had my wife back. The next morning, while I was changing the oil in my truck, she walked into the garage carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "I've been thinking," I smiled. "That usually costs us money." She handed me a mug. "I think we should start trying for a baby." I froze. For years, we'd agreed to wait until life slowed down. Now, suddenly, she sounded completely certain. "I thought we were waiting." "I've changed my mind." "Since when?" She looked away for a second. "I don't want to wait anymore." Something about the conversation bothered me. Not because I didn't want children, I did, but after months of barely seeing each other, it felt like we were skipping the part where we fixed our marriage first. I couldn't explain why. I only knew that for the first time in 11 years. Something didn't feel right. Claire's suggestion about having a baby stayed with me long after that conversation in the garage. It wasn't that I didn't want kids, I did. We'd talked about it for years. The strange part was the timing. For months, we'd barely been connecting. She was traveling constantly, working late, answering emails during dinner, and falling asleep with her laptop open beside her. Now she wanted to make the biggest decision of our marriage. It felt backwards. Over the next week, she kept bringing it up. Not directly. She'd leave articles open on her tablet about couples having children later in life. She pointed out a nursery display while we were shopping at Costco. One night, she even asked whether the spare bedroom would make a better nursery or home office. I finally asked her what had changed. She leaned against the kitchen counter and shrugged. "I've had time to think." "On your trips?" She nodded. "I don't want to wake up 5 years from now wishing we'd started sooner." "I understand that. But it feels like we skipped a few conversations." She frowned. "What conversations?" "The ones about us." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've barely had dinner together in months. You've been traveling almost every week. We hardly talk anymore." Instead of answering, she looked down at the coffee in her hands. "We're just busy." "Maybe. But busy shouldn't feel like this." She nodded slowly. "I know." For a second, I thought we were finally going to have the conversation we'd been avoiding. Instead, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen. "I need to answer this." "Work?" She gave me a quick smile. "You know how it is." Then she walked onto the back patio and closed the sliding door behind her. I watched her through the glass. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't smiling. She looked nervous. When she came back inside a few minutes later, I asked who it had been. "Marcus." He needed numbers for a meeting. That answer should have satisfied me. Instead, it only made me realize how often his name had become part of our lives. About 2 weeks later, Claire left for another business trip. Seattle, 2 nights. She kissed me goodbye before sunrise. "Don't forget to water the tomatoes." "I've kept them alive this long." "Barely." She laughed. climbed into her SUV, and drove away. I spent Saturday catching up on chores around the house. The dryer had been making a rattling noise for days, so I pulled it away from the wall to clean behind it. Dust. Loose change. A missing screwdriver I'd blamed on my toolbox. While sweeping under the laundry shelf, I found a crumpled parking receipt. Normally, I would have thrown it away. Then I noticed the logo. Portland International Airport. I unfolded it. Long-term parking. The date matched the trip Claire was on right now, not the city she'd told me she was visiting. I stared at the receipt for almost a minute. Maybe she'd connected through Portland. Maybe she'd borrowed someone else's car. Maybe she'd emptied her suitcase from an older trip. My mind came up with one explanation after another. Funny how quickly you start defending someone you love, even when they haven't been accused of anything. I slipped the receipt into my pocket and finished cleaning, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. When Claire got home Thursday evening, I decided to keep things casual. How was Seattle? She smiled while unpacking. Busy. Everything go okay? Yeah. Any flight delays? A little rain, but nothing terrible. She never mentioned Portland, not once. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I checked the weather. Seattle had been sunny most of the week. Portland had rain. I set my phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. One receipt wasn't proof. The weather wasn't proof. Neither was a missing conversation. But together, they were enough to make me pay attention. Over the next several days, I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Hotel charges that didn't quite match the cities she'd mentioned. Extra nights added to business trips. A calendar reminder for an executive dinner on a day she'd told me she'd already be flying home. None of it proved Claire was lying, but the pattern reminded me of troubleshooting an aircraft. One loose bolt doesn't ground a plane. 5 unrelated problems rarely stay unrelated for long. By the end of the week, I realized something. I wasn't looking for evidence that my wife was cheating. I was looking for a reason to stop feeling like something was wrong. Instead, every answer seemed to create another question. That's when I called a private investigator named Evelyn Brooks. I told myself I was doing it to put my fears to rest. Deep down, I wasn't sure which answer scared me more. Evelyn Brooks didn't look anything like the private investigators you see on television. No trench coat, no sunglasses, no walls covered with photos connected by red string. Her office was on the second floor of an older brick building downtown, above an insurance agency that had probably been there for 30 years. The waiting room held 2 chairs, a coffee maker that smelled like it had been brewing since sunrise, and a bookshelf filled with case files instead of decorations. For some reason, I trusted her immediately. People who know what they're doing rarely feel the need to impress anyone. She invited me into her office and listened while I explained everything. Claire's promotion, the constant travel, Marcus, the parking receipt, the weather, the strange calendar entries, the conversation about having a baby. She never interrupted, only took notes. When I finished, she closed the notebook. I've got 2 questions. Okay. If I investigate this and discover your wife isn't cheating, can you accept that? I thought about it before answering. I want to. That's not what I asked. She wasn't being rude. She was making sure I understood why I was there. I took a breath. Yes. If you tell me there's nothing going on, I'll believe you. She nodded. My second question. What do you actually want? The truth. Not revenge? No. I don't want to destroy my marriage. I want to know whether I'm imagining things. For the first time, she smiled. Then we can work together. Before I left, she explained how she handled every case. No illegal shortcuts. No hacking phones. No breaking into accounts. If I can't get information legally, I don't get it. I appreciated that. If I was going to learn the truth, I wanted to be able to live with how I found it. The first week was almost unbearable. I forced myself to act normally. I kissed Claire goodbye every morning, asked about her meetings, cooked dinner when I got home first. Some nights we'd watch television together without saying much. She'd lean against my shoulder like nothing had changed. Those moments confused me more than anything. If she was hiding something, how could she still seem so comfortable beside me? 7 days passed before Evelyn finally called. "I've finished the first round." "What did you find?" "Nothing dramatic." That wasn't the answer I'd expected. "Your wife went to work, visited 2 warehouses, had lunch with coworkers, attended meetings, went home." I actually felt myself relax. Maybe I'd let one receipt get inside my head. Maybe stress had made me see problems where none existed. Then Evelyn continued. "There is one thing." "What?" "Marcus." My stomach tightened again. "What about him?" "They almost never meet during regular business hours." Instead, she explained, they usually stayed after everyone else had gone home. Sometimes they'd meet for coffee before work, sometimes after, always away from the office. "They're careful," she said. "Careful?" "They don't give people much to notice." The next afternoon, I stopped by her office. She spread several photographs across the desk. Claire and Marcus leaving the office together, walking along the river, sitting outside a coffee shop talking for nearly 2 hours. Nothing looked romantic. No kissing. No holding hands. Just comfortable. Like two people who genuinely enjoyed being around each other. Then she showed me one more photograph. Claire hugged Marcus before they went their separate ways. As they pulled apart, he touched the side of her face for just a second. It wasn't much, but it wasn't the kind of goodbye I'd expect between coworkers. "It could still be innocent," I said. "It could." Evelyn didn't disagree. But relationships usually don't begin with obvious affairs. They begin with people spending more and more time together. I drove home with those words echoing in my head. A few days later, I met my friend Cal for lunch. We've worked together at the airport for over 10 years. He took one look at me and asked, "What's going on?" I showed him the photographs. He studied each one before handing them back. "I've seen worse." "So have I. But I've also seen how these things start." He stirred his coffee for a moment. "If you're wrong, don't accuse her. And if I'm right?" He looked me straight in the eye. "Then don't confront her until you know exactly what you're dealing with." That advice stayed with me, because deep down, I still hoped there was another explanation. The following Monday morning, Evelyn called again. This time, her voice sounded different. "I followed Marcus yesterday." "And?" "He drove to an apartment complex on the north side of Boise." "So?" "He doesn't live there." I sat up in my chair. What happened next? About 20 minutes later, Claire arrived. Neither of us spoke. They went inside separately. They stayed for just under an hour. When they left, they walked out 5 minutes apart. I stared out the window of the break room. The investigation had just taken a very different turn. For the first time, I wasn't wondering whether something was wrong. I was wondering how much of my life I no longer understood. I drove past the apartment complex that evening, not because I planned to confront anyone. I just needed to see it for myself. It sat on the north side of Boise behind a grocery store and a row of newer townhouses. There was nothing unusual about it. Kids rode bicycles through the parking lot. A man grilled dinner on a second-floor balcony. Someone walked 2 golden retrievers along the sidewalk. It looked like any other apartment complex in the city. That somehow made it worse. I parked across the street where I could see the entrance without attracting attention. About 15 minutes later, Marcus's BMW pulled into the lot. He parked, checked his phone, and went inside. Nothing unusual. Then Claire arrived. She parked on the opposite side of the building, looked around the lot for a second, and walked toward the same entrance. She never looked in Marcus's direction. If I hadn't already known he was inside, I would have assumed they had nothing to do with each other. I checked the time. 6:14. For the next hour, I sat in my truck staring at the front door. More than once, I reached for the handle. One part of me wanted to go upstairs and demand an explanation. The other part remembered Evelyn's advice. Don't confront someone until you know what you're confronting them about. At 7:18, Marcus came out first. He got into his car and drove away. 5 minutes later, Claire walked outside carrying nothing. She climbed into her SUV and left in the opposite direction. No goodbye, no conversation, no sign they'd even been together. It was almost practiced. The next morning, Evelyn already had new information. I checked the lease. You found the owner? She nodded. The apartment isn't owned by Northline. So who pays for it? Marcus. I frowned. He rented it himself. That surprised me. I'd assumed it was some kind of temporary corporate housing. Instead, Marcus had signed the lease nearly 8 months earlier, long before I'd noticed anything strange. What do you think they're using it for? I don't know. And I don't like guessing. She handed me another folder. I found something else. Inside were notes about a man named Thomas Avery, executive recruiter, logistics industry, national clients. He met with Claire twice, and Marcus introduced them. So she really is interviewing. Yes. For jobs outside Idaho. I leaned back in my chair. That explained some things, the business trips, the extra meetings, the unexplained dinners, but it didn't explain why she'd hidden everything from me. If she's looking for another job, why not just tell me? Evelyn answered without looking up from her notes. Maybe because she wasn't sure she'd take one. It made sense, but it still didn't explain Marcus. That weekend, Claire suggested we drive into the mountains for the day. No phones. No work. Just us. For a second, I almost believed things were getting better. We packed sandwiches, stopped for coffee on the way out of town, and spent the afternoon hiking a trail we'd visited years earlier. It felt familiar. Comfortable. Claire laughed when I slipped crossing a shallow stream. You've worked around airplanes for 16 years. And water almost took you out. I maintain aircraft. I never claimed to be graceful. She laughed so hard she had to stop walking. For the first time in months, it felt like we were ourselves again. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. I've got to take this. Work? She nodded. I'll only be a minute. She walked several yards down the trail before answering. I couldn't hear the conversation. Only her side. Not now. I'll call later. He's with me. She came back smiling. Sorry. No problem. But the mood had changed. On the drive home, she stared out the passenger window more than she talked. I caught myself wondering whether she'd rather have been somewhere else. That thought stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. Monday morning, Evelyn called before I left for work. I've confirmed the interviews. How many? 3. She emailed me a list. Denver, Charlotte, Nashville. 3 executive positions. 3 separate companies. Every introduction had come through Thomas Avery. Every meeting had been arranged by Marcus. So, the job search is real. It is. But Ryan? She paused. I don't think the interviews are the whole story. What makes you say that? I watched them after one of those meetings. The recruiter left. Claire and Marcus stayed. What happened? They had dinner. No paperwork. No business. They sat there for nearly 2 hours. And when they walked outside, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I already knew. The investigation wasn't about a promotion anymore. It was becoming something much harder to ignore. I didn't tell Claire what I'd learned. Not yet. I drove home with Evelyn's folder on the passenger seat and left it there until the next morning. Every answer I'd been looking for seemed to create two more questions. When I walked into the house, Claire was making spaghetti. She smiled the way she always had. Perfect timing. Smells good. We sat down for dinner and talked about everything except the one thing that mattered. She told me about a warehouse manager who'd accidentally sent a shipment to the wrong state. I told her one of the younger mechanics had spent 20 minutes looking for a wrench that was hanging from his own belt. She laughed, a real laugh. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. That was the hardest part. Nothing about her looked guilty. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't distant. She acted like the woman I'd been married to for 11 years. If I hadn't hired Evelyn, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Later that night, after Claire had gone upstairs, I sat alone on the back patio. The folder rested on the table beside me. I still hadn't opened it again. I didn't need to. The photographs were already burned into my memory. The next afternoon, Cal stopped by the airport. "You'll be gone 2 days?" "That's the plan." "Seattle again?" She didn't even hesitate. "Yep." I nodded. "Safe trip." She smiled. "I'll miss you." Those words hurt more than I expected. Wednesday morning, she kissed me goodbye and drove away before sunrise. At 9 o'clock, Evelyn texted me. "She's through security. Flight confirmed. Charlotte." I stared at the message until the screen went dark. By Thursday afternoon, Evelyn called again. "The interviews are over." "And?" "Claire and Marcus met with a leasing agent." I closed my eyes. "A leasing agent?" "Yes." "They toured an apartment." My stomach dropped. "So they're moving." "I can't say that for certain." "But there's more." She asked me to come to her office. When I arrived, a single folder sat on her desk. "This came in an hour ago." I opened it. A lease agreement. Charlotte, North Carolina. Move-in date 6 weeks away. I kept reading until I reached the signatures. Marcus Vale, Claire Holloway. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The apartment in Boise, the recruiter, the interviews, Charlotte. Every clue had been pointing toward this folder. "How long have you had this?" I finally asked. "Less than an hour." "You verified it?" "Yes." I slowly closed the folder. "So that's it?" "I believe so." "No more guessing?" "No." "No more assumptions?" She nodded. "You have the truth." I thanked her for everything she'd done and walked out carrying the folder. The drive home felt strangely peaceful. Not because I felt better, because the uncertainty was finally gone. For weeks I'd been chasing answers. Now I had them. The only thing left was the conversation I'd been dreading from the very beginning. When I pulled into the driveway, Claire's SUV was already there. She'd gotten home before me. I sat in my truck for another minute, with the lease resting on the passenger seat. Then I picked it up. It was time to ask my wife one last question. Not whether she'd been lying. I already knew the answer. I wanted to know whether she would finally tell me the truth. Claire was in the kitchen when I walked through the front door. She looked up and smiled. "You're home early." "I am." She stirred the pasta sauce for another few seconds before noticing the folder in my hand. "Everything okay?" "We need to talk." Something in my voice made her set the spoon down. She turned off the stove and followed me into the living room. Neither of us sat right away. Finally, I placed the folder on the coffee table between us. She looked at it without touching it. "What's that?" "You tell me." She slowly opened it. The moment she saw the first page, the color drained from her face. For a long time, she didn't move. She didn't flip through the paperwork. She didn't ask where I'd found it. She simply stared at the lease. Finally, she whispered, You know, I do. Content continues exactly as provided by the user. Thanks for listening. If you were in Ryan's position, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.